you would have your own SSID for your household, and then they would sort of automatically configure a public one.
Oh, wait, so on your router, like the router that's in your living room?
Yes,
Whoa.
yes. Oh, this is why they got into trouble, because then essentially the homeowner was paying for another Comcast customer to use their bandwidth.
Some strangers standing on the sidewalk outside your house using your it's the
war driving.
It's war driving, except
they except with a stamp of approval from the ISP.
Fun fact. The biggest, reddest button on a Star Trek tricorder was a key that dumped all the device's information wirelessly back to the ship. That was the lone function of the most important button on the device. And just pick your favorite sci-fi franchise. Visualize those handheld scanners or the communicators or computers. As exciting as the fictional tech of the future can be, absolutely none of those props were worth the resin they were cast in without their fictitious counterparts having a constant connection to somewhere else. Well, the same goes for the technology of the present. Every time you ask your smart speaker to play a song, or you share your exercise stats to your fitness friends group chat, or use your phone to navigate to a new part of town, you are relying on a connection that we used to call going online, back when far fewer people were on the internet. And the thing that keeps most of us connected to that internet is a thing many of us now take for granted. A little something called Wi-Fi. This is Living in the Future, a podcast powered by MediaTek that tells the story of technology that's leapt off the TV screen, transformed from fantastical cinematic science fiction to actual products that change the way we live and work. I'm your host, Michael Fisher, and this is Episode 3, Wi-Fi and the always-on internet connection. Now, I'm old enough to remember when Wi-Fi was still a novelty, so much so that my friends and I would occasionally pop wireless LAN cards into our laptops and go night driving down the roads of the small country town I grew up in, hunting for open wireless access points at farmhouses and supermarkets. From behind the wheel, my friend Ben, a mischievous grin on his face, informed me that this was called war driving. But our ends weren't nefarious. When we found an open Wi-Fi network, we'd use it to log on to AOL Instant Messenger to tell our friends what we were doing. Because it was just that cool to be able to tap into the always beckoning, already addictive waters of the then novel internet. From a laptop, in a car, no wires needed. The small-town cops who found us and told us to go home didn't really get it. Wi-Fi would go on to enable things much more critical than bored country teenagers, of course. It now powers an estimated 14 billion devices on the Internet of Things, and my guest is going to tell us all about how we got here. On the way, though, my sponsor would like me to remind you of its role in that tapestry. MediaTek is the #1 supplier of Wi-Fi chipsets across broadband, retail routers, consumer electronics devices, and gaming. That's pretty cool. And when Wi-Fi isn't enough, well, MediaTek is the 5G leader as well, powering a wide range of 5G applications, from smartphones to hotspots and routers to laptops, vehicles, and more. That means you can count on MediaTek for fast and reliable connectivity, while also enjoying longer battery life thanks to MediaTek's power-efficient solutions. I think that's pretty cool, too. Thanks to MediaTek for sponsoring this podcast. Kelly Hill is the executive editor of RCR Wireless News and a veteran of a decade of tech reporting focused on network infrastructure, big data analytics, and manifold other facets of wireless communication, which makes her the perfect person to help us put the why in Wi-Fi. Kelly, welcome to the future, and I'm very sorry about that lame joke.
Well, I'm glad to be here, lame jokes and all.
Let's start off with kind of a rather weird question that I think a lot of people don't even think about anymore because Wi-Fi has become a term of common usage. What's in a name? Why Wi-Fi? I think I know at one point what it stood for, but can you tell us what that even means? Does it still stand for wireless fidelity?
That's a really interesting question because I think ultimately Wi-Fi was really looking for a name that went beyond sort of the numbers and letters. And so, when 802.11 was first developed, and this was way, way, way back in the day, 802.11 is not exactly a flashy, like, let's sell this thing to consumers, and 802.11 is a good thing. And so when 802.11 really started becoming a potential consumer product and folks really wanted that type of connectivity, they essentially went looking for a brand. And so,
Sure.
Yes, I think there's sort of that sort of idea of wireless fidelity, or even I've also heard wireless fiber. But ultimately,
I hadn't heard that.
It wasn't really very fiber-like at the very beginning either. It was, 11. It was just megabits, single-digit megabits
Much
per
slower,
second.
yeah.
So even calling it wireless fiber was probably a stretch at the time, But it was really more about not necessarily being an acronym, but something that was easy for people to remember, that sort of had a bit of a techie sound to it. Sort of like
Sure.
adding I to everything, gives it a certain cachet. And, and ultimately they developed that name in conjunction with a branding company. And so, that was where Wi-Fi comes from, as opposed to being that telecom has a ton of acronyms, but this actually isn't necessarily one of them. So it was really more about having a word alternative to, it's 802.11b or it's 802.11a. It's Wi-Fi 1, it's Wi-Fi 2.
I was fascinated to learn in the research for this episode that not only was everything you say is correct, and I did not know about the fiber thing, but that it was also kind of, maybe they were capitalizing on the hi-fi familiarity that people had with that kind of thing as well. Audio fans, right? And I forgot there was even a brand, like a visual brand that represents Wi-Fi. That black and white kind of icon that is still used?
Yes. Yeah. No, it's true.
I did not know. Like, I didn't know that there was a little hidden yin-yang in there. Did you know that?
I don't think I've ever seen it that way, but now that you mention it, I can totally picture this in my head. And yeah, there really is.
Yeah. It apparently indicates the certification of a product for interoperability, according to cablefree.net. So I don't know. I get immense satisfaction out of how we brand things that later become indispensable parts of our everyday life. So, but you mentioned this was back in the day. So we're talking, at the beginning, in the late 90s, when Wi-Fi starts to creep its way into the public, consciousness. Even then, surfing the web took a lot of bandwidth. Right around 2000 or 2001 is when I was getting my first cable modem at home, just because the dial-up was no longer fast enough to accommodate my family's web surfing needs. So, in brief, if it's even possible, how did we manage to squeeze so much data into that finite real estate of a wireless technology? Because as we've talked about in previous episodes, the wireless spectrum is limited. It's like a highway you can only fit so many cars onto. So, I mean, was there like a magic moment where that came to pass, or broadly, how did we do it?
Well, I think the benefit of hindsight here is that it's easy to think about how ubiquitous Wi-Fi is today. And it's easy to forget that back in those early days, there weren't a lot of devices. There just weren't a lot of folks who could actually connect and use Wi-Fi. And then, you didn't have smartphones at the time that were, or at the beginning at least, that were able to connect to Wi-Fi. You were still dealing with the days of walled gardens when you were lucky if you could get onto the internet at all, much less, get full access to, the entirety of the web.
We were just talking a little bit off air about how slow Wi-Fi was at the beginning too, relative to the cable connection and things of that sort. And we had to essentially decide on a bandwidth or an area of the wireless spectrum that was able to carry as much data as we needed. Do you have any idea of how we settled on 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz, these two bands that we know very well now as kind of where Wi-Fi lives?
Yeah, so, that's a good question. And a lot of it is, unfortunately, I'm not aware of who the original incumbents were in the 2.4. So 2.4 gigahertz is where Wi-Fi started. That's an ISM band. The industrial and scientific wireless operations have been allowed in that band for a long time. So, we used to there were a lot of, sort of cordless phones that could operate there.
I was going to say that.
Microwave ovens were, also sort of spewing stuff into, not necessarily always intentionally, but sort of, wide-band interference there. A lot of just, it's become kind of, and I know some people sort of refer to it as a junk band over time. If you have wireless unlicensed operations, then sort of the 2.4 gigahertz band has sort of been the first place where you look to operate. And, ultimately,
strikes me that you're describing like a dumping ground almost.
Well, wireless microphones, just tons of things that actually have, even in the days of sort of analog, have operated wirelessly for a very long time. And they may not have been, a ton of bandwidth, but there were probably, quite a few of them. And, over time, that just sort of was also where Wi-Fi started as well. The problem was that Wi-Fi really, really took off in a way that many of these other things did not. And it required a lot more bandwidth than something like a baby monitor or a wireless microphone. And so you had people setting up networks where they really wanted to be able to, have always available connectivity. And so that band really got congested. And so ultimately what happened is that, because of the popularity of the Wi-Fi technology, you had the FCC going, we need to open up more spectrum for this. And I believe it was in about 2013 or so that they really started looking at 5 gigahertz and opening up that band, because it, 2.4 was getting to the point where you just couldn't get a very good quality experience a lot of the times, especially if you were in a major airport, transportation hub, city, where a lot of folks were all competing to have their Wi-Fi devices on that same spectrum. And so 5 gigahertz, still today, uses a lot of, provides a lot more spectrum than 2.4 does. And so, that has definitely eased the crunch there. But, the FCC just opened up another huge swath of spectrum at 6 gigahertz, because even with the additional spectrum at 5, Wi-Fi is just such a pervasive and popular technology that it needed more. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like every day we're getting a piece of IoT technology, like a new connected light bulb or a connected, I don't know, smart diaper or just all kinds of accessories flooding the market, and they all use Wi-Fi. I want to get to the future of Wi-Fi in a little bit, but before we get too far away from the past of it, verify a memory for me. It seems to me that, again, I got cable internet in my home in 2000, 2001. I thought that was cool. But right around the same time, showing up in my friends' living rooms and dens or, computer room, I would start seeing these wireless routers, maybe 2002. But, it seemed to me that I learned about a thing called Wi-Fi very quickly. And almost immediately thereafter, people in my middle class fringes of my acquaintances were able to buy them. It seems to me that prices came down on the components for this so quickly. Do you have any sense of how or why that happened? Is it just that easy to make a Wi-Fi radio in the early aughts?
I think that was sort of the tipping point, because you're right that your memories are right that those early aughts were really where Wi-Fi took off. I did a little bit of checking here, and I found a few mentions of something like 18 million Wi-Fi chipsets shipping in 2002. So, I mean, that was so, and, millions of devices, millions and millions of devices coming online in those early aught years. And so when you get to that level of scale, you sort of already hit that point where, the components and the pricing are at a point where the demand is such that, you can make money if you scale up your production. And so, so that is about the time that we really started to hit scale in terms of, the money that the industry was willing to put into it, because clearly this technology was in high demand. And I think it's important to remember that also there was a precursor where, you really had sort of the enterprise rollouts. You had the transportation hubs, and you had the businesses saying, oh, this technology seems really useful to us and to our customers, the folks who are going to be visiting us. This is a perk that people really want. And so, I think you sort of see that build in the enterprise space, which is often kind of the way that things go with Wi-Fi. And then, it flows into the consumer space, and then you get that additional scale because the costs, are more reasonable.
So I think we talked a little bit also about symptom is not the right word. A fun byproduct of this time when Wi-Fi seemed to become ubiquitous overnight was that enthusiasts or geeks such as myself were being introduced to this concept that I think was called war driving. I think it was a takeoff on war dialing, and I think both of those owe their etymology of that term to the excellent film War Games. But bottom line, I used to be, my friends and I, back from college in my small town at this period, would drive around with our laptops that, by the way, didn't have integrated Wi-Fi. We had to put in like a PCMCIA card that had a wireless modem in it. And we used to drive around our town and look for open access points, like just drive around until the Wi-Fi menu showed somebody's distant farmhouse or maybe the local convenience store had a network that we could connect to. Mm-hmm. And then we could just park outside and see if we could connect to it, and then do nothing more nefarious than, like check our email just because it was fun and novel to at 10 at night, check our email without a wired connection. Did you ever do anything like that? Because that's one of my weirdest treasured memories, and I don't really know why.
So I was not quite at the point where I had a laptop set up in order to run on Wi-Fi. I was still plugging in for the most part, but I mean, I'll do that now, depending on where I am, open up the SSID menu, scroll down, see who doesn't have a password on their networks. I swear, though, that I remember media reports, in that era being like, oh, there might be people who sit outside your house and steal your Wi-Fi signal. So
absolutely.
And that, and part of it, that was encouraging people, put a password that's, and hopefully something better than 1, 2, 3, 4, on your home network. And there's still a lot of people, even these days, who don't necessarily do that.
Maybe I have those media reports to blame just as much as I do, bored small town cops for the fact that on one of those 3 war driving expeditions, we definitely were like pulled over by a cop. We were already stopped, of course, but a cop came up and was like, "What are you doing?" And I assumed this farmhouse that we were stealing internet from 500 feet away had called the police on us. We're like, "No, we're just going online. Do you know what that is, officer?" "Never mind. It's fine." Definitely good to have a password on your Wi-Fi. I want to circle back. We were talking about bands before, 2.4, 5 gigahertz. These days, we have these dual band routers. I have one. I am one of these noobs who just got a router from my internet service provider. And, I'm like, yeah, this is fine. I took it home. I set up my new apartment, which I just moved into a few months ago. I got every single light on a smart switch, on a smart outlet. I was all very happy with it. And then we got like one power surge and everything disconnected. And when the power came back on, I lost connection to half the things. And I'm like, Wait, this isn't supposed to happen. What's going on? I had to manually factory reset all these smart outlets.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also got this new accessory called a love box.
A love box.
I didn't prep you for this. Sorry. It's a little one-way messenger, essentially, for people in long-distance relationships, as I am. And you kind of send text messages back and forth, but it's a box that lives on your desk. It's not a mobile device. And it only operates on 2.4 gigahertz. And it was hell setting that thing up because I couldn't manually configure my home network to only give me 2.4 or only give me 5. Because it was trying to be smarter than I wanted it to be. I wanted it to be dumb again. Is this something you've heard of? Is this something that we might see a solution to, other than, well, eventually 2.4 gigahertz devices are just going to be retired?
So this is a tough one because, theoretically, you want a device that is smart enough to figure out, there's interference in your 2.4 gigahertz channels, and so I'll bump you to 5 where you're going to have a better experience. Unfortunately, if you only, obviously, as you discovered, if you only have a 2.4 gigahertz device, then that means your device no longer operates. So, it's the industry trying to solve a problem, but then there are other problems sort of unintentionally created for this. I think where I tend to see and hear of issues is, when you don't necessarily have those dual band routers, or even if you do, if they are configured such that you sort of default to specific channels and say that, everybody in a particular block, or maybe every other house in a particular block, all has the same internet service provider. When they send their texts out, they tend to configure them for the same channels. And so then you end up you can get interference from your neighbor because they too get their internet from company Y. And, and the default configuration is X channel, Y channel. And so,
wouldn't you think that would be part of the procedure, for the techs to be like, all right, now if you're installing on these next door apartments, configure the channels differently?
Yes. So, and that's the kind of issue that, it can be really common in some circumstances, and dual band routers are actually meant to sort of address some of those things that are really, really common like that. And so, those default configurations, if you, move to something that's more dynamic, then you end up getting less interference issues, and, everybody can kind of share some spectrum that is fairly congested a little bit more easily.
So the auto switching router is a good thing. The thing that I should direct my ire at are these older accessories that only operate on one band. And hopefully they see some upgrades in the future. Hopefully we get a Lovebox 2.0 that can operate on both bands.
That would be nice because, backwards compatibility is a lot, is pretty standard. It is a lot easier than forwards compatibility on devices because you just never know what's coming next.
Right. Yeah, of course. You've mentioned microwave ovens before, too. So before we get off the Spectrum thing, I thought this was for the longest time. I thought this was like an apocryphal tale that using a microwave oven to defrost a chicken for 30 minutes is not a thing you want to do if, say, you're running a video call, because it will impact your internet speeds if you're using Wi-Fi. And I ran a speed test once, living in an old apartment where I used my kitchen island as a standing desk. And I just decided to check it out one time. And sure enough, my throughput went through the floor the minute I started running that microwave oven. So is this a thing that was probably 10 years ago. Is this a thing that's still a problem today, assuming that you're connected to a, 2.4 gigahertz hotspot? Or is this something that modern microwave ovens, are better shielded against? Do you know?
So when I have read about this, it has generally been in the context of older microwave ovens, which do last forever. So it's entirely possible. I have not done any testing myself. What I suspect is happening here is that you're getting a wideband interference signal, basically something like that I would compare to, say, if you were trying to run wireless while somebody was welding, you get just this huge interference that that interferes across a wide section of the band. So it's not just one channel or two channels. It's, it's basically flooding kind of the area of spectrum. And, and so it's a little unpredictable about exactly where that's going to be and which channels are going to be impacted. So it's probably not a great idea if you're really looking to, to optimize your 2.4 gigahertz. Again, this is the kind of thing that those automatic frequency hoppers essentially will kind of help, because it will bump you up to, ideally, your dual band router is going to say, oh, there's a whole bunch of stuff at 2.4. So let's bump you up to 5 so you can stay on your video call. And, and you're not going to have necessarily that same level of degraded experience as you would if you were still sitting down at 2.4 while your microwave oven is blasting away.
That is a really great description. I am now going to probably muddy it because I'm famously terrible at analogies. This seems to me to be a situation where if I'm trying to talk to you, okay, you're my router, I am my laptop, and we're having a nice conversation, we have a good Wi-Fi connection, then somebody starts welding or somebody starts using a microwave oven. Let's call that microwave oven a giant boom box that is suddenly switched on, and it's so loud you and I can no longer hear each other. Is that a good analogy so far?
That is a good analogy. And it's actually a great analogy for Wi-Fi, because the mechanism by which Wi-Fi detects interference is sort of a listen before talk. So if your machine or your access point listens and it hears something in the band, essentially, it's not going to start talking, because that would be rude and interferency. And so that's sort of exactly the mechanism.
Wow. And switching to, to 5 would be the equivalent of you and me saying, it's really noisy in here. This sucks. Let's go to another room. Is that like about? Mm-hmm. Okay. Got it. That's cool. That's the first analogy I've ever made successfully in my life. So thank you for the help. These, it's in my reading, it seems to me that Wi-Fi used to be comparatively simple. You would have the access point or the router would be basically broadcasting an omnidirectional signal. And if a receiver happened to be in that bubble, that, sphere of RF range, they could have a conversation, and great, we got lucky. But these days, there's crazy advanced stuff, right? There's something called beamforming, which I guess is an antenna literally steering a radio signal. There's something called MIMO, multiple input, multiple output. Can you there's a lot of this, and I don't want to get too in the weeds on it, but just to help folks and me understand how intricate and complex a technology this is, can you talk about one or both of those just, quickly, like how Wi-Fi has gotten more robust over time?
Okay. So absolutely there is cool stuff happening in Wi-Fi, and it has absolutely gotten more advanced. It gets more advanced with every release of the next generation of the standard. So beamforming is also something that's used in cellular technology, especially when you get into higher spectrum bands. So the spectrum does not, the higher you go in the spectrum bands, the shorter the range. So 5 gigahertz goes about, the propagation is about half as far as, I think that's right, as 2.4. It's definitely shorter. And then if you get up to 6, that's even a little shorter. And if you go up to something like, 12 gigahertz or 60 gigahertz, which is also an unlicensed frequency that 802.11 can use, then you're talking really, really short ranges, tons of bandwidth, but very short range.
That makes your connection more fragile, right?
Yes.
So if you could turn away from and put your body between yourself and the router, and maybe that would cause enough interference to disconnect you at these higher frequencies.
Absolutely. So and so if you have your router in the middle of your house and there are walls or maybe concrete block or lots of metal pipes that the signal has to sort of bounce through and around, it doesn't go through very well. It sort of has to reflect enough for you to get a good connection. And everybody pretty much has experienced this, where you'll have a really great connection in one room and then you go into the next room and it just all but disappears. Or, if you're on the second floor of your house versus the basement, the signal quality is very different. And so some of these things are, a lot of these things, these features are meant to compensate for some of those things, especially the shortened range as you move higher in the spectrum. And so beamforming is basically, it's a way of sort of focusing the energy of the transmission to really target the device so that it's a stronger connection. It's there's more sort of energy going back and forth between the two, and therefore your connection is more stable. It's more reliable, and
like making the signal a laser beam instead of
exactly.
I don't know,
yeah,
like
or a flashlight instead of a lamp that fills a room. You might be able to you might stand behind something and be in shadow, but with beamforming, it's really meant to target the device in a way that really strengthens that the light, the signal.
It's wild that we can do that without a directional apparatus. I picture physical beamforming, and I picture a modem or a router that has like a satellite dish looking apparatus on top of it. It's wild that you can do that in a box. Well, that looks just like any other box.
There's antennas. The external antennas, are really help to enable this. So they're there. They're not quite satellite dishy. But that's and some of the more recent releases of also include multi-user MIMO. So MIMO is multiple input, multiple output, basically using multiple streams of signal in order to make sure that you have redundancy and additional bandwidth that is dedicated to each user, and reusing the available resources in order to maximize both the capacity and, again, the strength of the connection.
You were talking about bouncing signals before too, and that's I like to figure if this podcast goes long enough, I'm going to have a little segment every episode called Multipath Appreciation Hour, because I love the fact that we developed radios that are capable of, if you are blocked, if there is a wall between you and the antenna, but there's a door open on the other side of the room, then that radio signal can bounce around a corner and still be usable for stuff. I think that's cool as hell. I think I said that in the first episode. I'm going to say it again, pretty much every episode. Multipath is great. We were talking cellular. You kind of touched on cellular a second ago. There's this thing that I have never used in my life, and I probably should. In cities and even small towns that I have lived in, I've noticed that at some point, internet service providers started offering like local area Wi-Fi to their subscribers. So you're like not in your house, so you pay whoever for Wi-Fi at home or for your home internet connection. But when you leave your house, your phone still says, out of whatever, Optimum Wi-Fi or Time Warner. And you can connect to Wi-Fi because they've put these boxes up on like phone poles. First of all, do you use that? Do you use that, or do you just rely on the cellular network for your phone?
So I am a Comcast customer, and they do have a very extensive footprint. And most of the cable companies have been doing this for a number of years now. There are coverage maps essentially on their websites. If I remember, it's been a while since I checked, but they'll tell you where the nearest hotspot is. And for a while, some of them were even doing dual SSIDs on their customer equipment. They got into a little bit of trouble in this in California, and I'm not sure that they're doing it anymore. But they would basically, you would have your own SSID for your household, and then they would sort of automatically configure a public one.
Oh, wait, so on your router, like the router that's in your living room?
Yes,
Whoa.
Yes. Oh, this is why they got into trouble, because then essentially the homeowner was paying for another Comcast customer to use their bandwidth.
Some strangers is standing on the sidewalk outside your house using your it's
the war driving.
It's war driving, except
they except with a stamp of approval from the ISD.
Wow, that's absolutely crazy. I'm glad they got into trouble for that. Sorry.
So these footprints of commercial ISP hotspots do exist, and yeah, you can log in, you can use them. So where you run into issues is really authentication, and this is a real barrier for Wi-Fi, and it has been for a really long time. Because generally when you log onto a Wi-Fi network, now that we all are using security the way that we're supposed to, or that an ISP, wants to make sure only its customers can access it, you have to, put in your login and your account password. And so when I'm on my phone that I haven't necessarily used to access my Comcast account, I'm like, oh, what is my password? What is my account? Which variation did I use for this? So that's a bit of a barrier. And once you get it set up and all your cookies and stuff in place, I think it gets a little easier, and there are actually Wi-Fi technologies that are meant to sort of smooth that barrier. Passpoint or Hotspot 2.0, I think are some of the things that have been devised over time to really prevent, to try and address that authentication issue, because it is an issue. And this is one of the things that really keeps Wi-Fi from looking more like cellular and acting more like cellular is, that if I'm in a hotspot in North Dakota and then, I take a flight to Florida and I'm logging into a hotspot from the same company there, does it automatically recognize me? Well, sometimes not.
Whereas with cellular, your terminal or your phone is, that authentication happens in the background. It's totally invisible to the user because all that setup has been done the first time you set up the phone, right? The network is like, oh, there's the IMEI. That's
exactly.
The phone. Yeah, it's
and even if you're in a foreign country, it always says, oh, you have these roaming privileges. And so, of course, I know it's smooth. It's seamless. It works. It's one of those things that really, I think, distinguishes cellular as a technology. And Wi-Fi, the industry has really, really tried to address this. I'm not sure for the everyday user that it's necessarily there yet. And it's not necessarily always with the technology. Some of it is sort of the barriers that an individual ISP puts in place in terms of, we only want our users to be able to use this. And, do they have the same setup and configurations everywhere in the country? And, is every hotspot that you log into and every device that you're on configured in order to make all of this work? So there's a lot of variables that sort of make it complex to actually do.
Yeah. Variables, complexity. I'm hearing a lot of stuff that no one wants to deal with in 2023 on their devices, right? So that leads into my, kind of penultimate question, which is like, at the same time that complexity does exist on the Wi-Fi side of things, we're being told over and over again that 5G cellular is the way to like incredible amounts of bandwidth. We're not going to have to worry about capacity issues as much. It's just this miracle, wonderful technology. And, we can have a whole episode on that. But it is simpler. It does usually work in most areas. So, part of the reason I've never used one of these ISP offered Wi-Fi solutions out on the town is because the cellular network just works and I don't have to worry about it. I don't need to go to Wi-Fi because I'm just using my cellular connection. Is 5G going to eventually kind of kill these town-wide Wi-Fi installations, or
so it's
are they
interesting.
Here to stay, do you think?
There was a real movement toward municipal Wi-Fi, like actual public, anybody can use it Wi-Fi for a while in, maybe the mid to late aughts. I'm trying to remember exactly when it was. And that, it was, we're going to pay for this with advertising. And it turns out that business model didn't really work out very well. I think you sort of still see it in airports, but, again, it's a private network. It's not, the city pays to put up Wi-Fi and, and it all works. So, so will 5G kill public or sort of publicly accessible Wi-Fi? I don't think so. I think I think there are a few reasons for that. For one, the cellular operators want you on Wi-Fi. As much as they also want you using their network and they want that usage, they want you paying for it. There is so much traffic that as soon as they can get you onto Wi-Fi, that is their preference. They really want you to offload to a Wi-Fi network. So if you're somebody like AT&T, who also has a whole lot of Wi-Fi hotspots that are public and out there because they're also an ISP, they would really rather that your device, that all that traffic, that video that you're watching, take up capacity on the unlicensed spectrum that they didn't have to pay for, and that and backhaul that they don't necessarily have to pay for because you're on maybe your home Wi-Fi network. They would much rather have you on that or on any Wi-Fi that you can get onto than to have that HD video you're watching all going over the cellular network along with 20 other people who are also sitting on the bus or the train with you.
You chose a great example in AT&T because they learned that lesson very the hard way in the 2010, 2012 timeframe when anybody who had an iPhone on AT&T couldn't make a phone call in Times Square because the network was so overloaded. Right?
Yes, well, that's what happens when you get a killer device, and all of a sudden everybody's like, "Oh, and you can only get it on AT&T." So then, it's yes. So then you run into capacity issues, and it was right. There are choke points along the way for this kind of adoption.
Yeah, it sounds like 5G is not this silver bullet, or not 5G. I don't want to beat up on 5G, but cellular is not this silver bullet solution that, Wi-Fi plays a very important role, obviously, inside the home, but also, on a larger scale as well.
So I think, cellular is always going to be really good at what cellular was designed for, which was, outdoors, areas where you might be traveling, you might be riding in a car, you might be riding on a plane, or not on a plane, you're not allowed to use your phone there, but, on a train or something else where, the cellular really can do a very good job, and the handovers and sort of the speed at which you're moving, are really well done in cellular, and Wi-Fi is not an ideal situation unless, and we see this a lot nowadays where, there is Wi-Fi on the plane, there is Wi-Fi on the train, and then you eliminate the handover by just being able to connect to that single Wi-Fi access point, no matter where you are. And the system takes care of the back end connection that actually keeps you connected. So, because
the access point is moving with you, you're not doing handoffs every 2 miles.
Exactly. And so, cellular is also really good at, the latency needed for voice, the quality related to voice, all of that cellular does really, really well. Wi-Fi is excellent at what it does. It's excellent at being a great connectivity vehicle indoors and having enough capacity for a lot of devices, whether those are in-home devices or, whether it's, a tablet, a couple of phones, as long as you have access to enough clear channels, which can be tricky if you live, say, in an urban apartment building, and there's a ton of other people who are competing for that same spectrum.
And you've been configured on the same channels as your neighbor.
yes. So hopefully you have a dual band router,
right?
that will get you out of that trouble.
It puts me in mind of my previous living situation. In my old apartment, I lived with a fellow tech reviewer, and we would each come home with new review devices several times a week, and we'd think nothing of attaching them to the home network. And I think we had several nodes. It was a pretty big apartment, so it was a fairly complicated Wi-Fi network, but he set it up, so that was good. But we started having connectivity issues after a year or so, and we eventually, through a lot of just troubleshooting, came to realize that we literally had too many devices on the network. Like, you have 17 phones all trying to back up Google Photos at the same time, and the Xbox and the TV and all that stuff. And that's an outlier, but we started adding more stuff even toward the end there. We had a little pet monitor that would wander around. To your point, there were cameras. There was new devices showing up all the time, light bulbs, all of which wanted to connect to these home networks. So yeah, it really is just the same old story over and over again through the decades, isn't it? More speed, yes, but also, just as crucially, more capacity.
Absolutely.
Kelly Hill, this has been awesome. I really appreciate you taking the time to demystify what's essentially become a utility for so many of us, but is still this really impressive, crazily complex thing that it wouldn't work at all if it weren't for some very smart people. And I appreciate you making it very understandable to me and to everybody listening. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Michael, for having me.
Would you let people know where they can find you on the internet if that is a thing that you would like to share?
Sure. So I write for RCR Wireless News. We are at www.rcrwireless.com. I'm also on Twitter, mostly reading, but occasionally jumping in at @KHill RCR.
Appreciate that. And just additional shout out to RCR. I do a lot of publishing about old phones and things whose details I have long ago forgotten. And RCR is a great resource for finding out more about those things. It's been around for a while. So really nice to chat with somebody who works there.
Nice to chat with you.
The smart home is something we're going to talk more about on a future installment of this podcast, because I'm not sure there's anything more futuristic than walking into your apartment and telling it verbally that you'd like all the lights on and your favorite music playing and turn on the TV. And by the way, is the fridge still stocked? But whether it's any of that, or it's video calling or streaming your favorite songs, whatever you're doing, I'm not sure anything we'll cover in this series is quite as significant and still so underappreciated as the modern-day must-have utility that is Wi-Fi. One more thanks to Kelly Hill for painting such a clear picture for us. Meanwhile, it's time for me to hit that big red emergency button on my own tricorder and beam myself over to the next episode. If you've got thoughts on the present, the future, or even the past of Wi-Fi, especially if you have your own war-driving stories, please tweet them to me. I'm at Captain2Phones. That's Captain, the number 2 phones. Until next time, thanks once more to my sponsor, MediaTek, and thanks to you for listening. I've been Michael Fisher, and I'll see you in the future.